has had to implement it. So we're eager to hear his perspective, and we welcome Vice Admiral Mike Connor.
Well, thank you, Pete, for that kind introduction. And what I'd like to do for the next 20 to 30 minutes at the most is walk you through a general overview of our strategy for how we acquire and how we employ submarines going forward. And we believe very strongly that it's a good, healthy strategy. It imposes cost on our adversaries. It enables other parts of our Navy and our military, and makes us all very much more effective. So it's not a submariners out doing their own thing for their own reasons. It's submarines that are enabling the joint force. So with that, if you go to the next slide there, Justin. And obviously you can see the slides here or on the sides, and there are basically 6 major lines of operation to this strategy. I'm going to start in the center and then work my way around this diagram we're talking about. But the first, and we'll talk about these things in detail, but for starters, it's all about owning the best platforms, because submarines operate in this very ambiguous world, and the superiority of the platforms from which you operate are what enables everything else, because it's all about having capability, knowing you've got the capability, and having your adversary always wondering what capability you really have and where you might be employing it. So we start with the best platforms. There are parallels for that in surface and in aviation, some of which we rely on very heavily in the ASW world. But anyway, that's tenet number 1. Tenet number 2 is that we are a high-demand, low-density asset. We'd like to we call beat the enemy system. You know, we're in a little bit of a fortuitous position today in the submarine force, because as everyone talks about anti-access and area denial issues that others have, the biggest impediment to where one of our submarines can go and project power from today is this thing called the 20-fathom curve. And outside of that, there are very few places that we can't get to, and very few places that we don't go to whenever we want to. So the issue in the near term isn't so much where can we go, it's what can we do when we get there. But in the future, we have intelligent adversaries, and we fully expect that they will attempt to extend anti-access area denial below the surface of the water. And so it's important for us that we anticipate that that is coming, that we be ready for that to come. In fact, that we hope that it comes, believe it or not, because someone who's trying to do A2AD against a submarine force is going to spend a lot of money. And it's our sincerest hope that they do. And then after they do, that we will take their investment and make it essentially irrelevant or worse, make it something that we can use against them. Moving to the lower right, that aspect of our strategy, we call it protect our strategic assets. And what we define as a strategic asset varies depending on the world situation and maybe even the tactical situation. It might be ensuring that a strike group, carrier strike group, is not vulnerable to torpedo attack from an enemy submarine because we attain near perfect knowledge in the relatively small area around the strike group from which the enemy can launch a torpedo. And then we force him into the sort of more generic, if you want to attack our surface assets, you have to use missiles to do that, which means he gets a smaller warhead, and we reduce it to within the overall integrated air and missile defense problem. But a strategic asset might be something else. It might be one of our SSBN patrol areas that we want to continue to have the confidence that we have today, that those ships are invulnerable. It might be undersea infrastructure. Think oil and gas, and increasingly think transoceanic fiber, and think about the economic penalty we would pay if those types of communications were interrupted by an adversary, either during war or during the road to war. There are a lot of scholars in here. There's some great work done by a professor from the Army Staff College out in Fort Leavenworth, where he talks about this Russian strategy of strategic operations to defeat critical infrastructure targets. And they're putting a lot of thought into things like, power infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure, and communications infrastructure. And some of the key nodes in those systems reside under the ocean. So we need to look at how we ensure the continuity in those areas. In the lower left, we talk about getting on the same page. We have our own unique set of information that we use in the undersea. Some of it comes from our submarines themselves. Some comes from these integrated undersea surveillance systems. Some comes from satellites and surface ships and so forth. Some of it's actually unclassified and comes from things like the automatic identification system, the AIS system that a lot of the merchant traffic uses. And our challenge is how do we integrate all of this in one picture and have everyone that we talk to during a time of conflict be sharing the same picture. And it sounds like it's easy, especially if you have your Google map and you can turn on the traffic and the roads and all that. To do something that simple across the many classification and programmatic boundaries that we wrestle in the DoD is a lot harder than turning on the streets on your Google. And what is of particular frustration to me as I go out and seek industry help solving problems like this is that I talk to people and they say, well, we kind of have something that does that. But they do it for, a three-letter agency or something like that, and not for us. And so to know that doing that sort of thing could be done very easily if we could overcome the administrative and programmatic boundaries, as we can do a lot better. Which leads to the final line of effort, which is written across the back there: get faster. I'm going to talk today a little bit about some of the specific programs and technologies and that sort of thing that we use. But at the end of the day, 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, we won't win or lose based on any one specific program or capability we develop. We will win or we will lose based on the pace at which we can introduce new capabilities on our side that change the game plan, as well as react to things that the adversary does. And we live in a world right now where the technology cycle runs 2 to 3 years. And we navigate a world in which the acquisition cycle runs between about 6 and 20 years. And you can't win in a 3-year technology cycle if it takes you 20 years to implement an idea. And I really need help from influential people like you to persuade the system through which we acquire what we use and open up the boundaries of programs, open up the definitions of milestones and that sort of thing so that we can stay as adaptable on the front line as the pace of technology would allow us to do. That is hugely important. And we're either going to solve that and win, or we're not going to solve that and we're going to lose. Okay, next slide, please. So what does owning the best platforms mean to us? In our case, it means continuing this very successful program called the Virginia-class submarine that Senator Warner helped us put together. It is the best submarine in the world, clearly demonstrated to be so against all comers, I might say. And we need to make it even better. And we need to make it better by taking this wonderful platform and improving its payload capacity so that we can carry a lot of the other technologies that we're developing into the places that they're needed. And we're proud of what we have done so far. It is, to my knowledge, the only major acquisition program in the entire Department of Defense that consistently delivers on time and under budget, or I say ahead of schedule and under budget. And while we're proud of that, we're a little bit nervous because success sometimes leads to complacency, and we're raising the rate at which we deliver the ships. And frankly, we fully understand that if we don't continue to deliver with that type of budget and schedule performance, that maybe a lot of the friends that we have that support us in delivering those things right now, that maybe they won't be with us. So we can't afford to get sloppy. And while we continue to deliver that platform, we need to make it better through this thing we call the Virginia Payload Module, which will give us that additional capacity, whether that be for Tomahawk missiles or whatever follows a Tomahawk, whether it be for large diameter unmanned undersea vehicles, and so forth. There's a whole bunch of things coming that we need to be ready and adaptable enough to handle. And then we need to make it even better in its acoustic performance. It's very, very good right now, but we have some formidable adversaries coming down the line. And we now understand that we have the physics and the processing capacity to make the next great leap in sonar. And we're going to do that, starting with the USS South Dakota. And then the other big program in the lower left, and I guess the size of the picture reflects the size of the program. We're going to start recapitalizing our SSBN force, which is the backbone of the naval leg of the strategic triad. And we're going to build 12 ships. We're in the technology development phase now. We're going to start bending metal in 2021, and we're going to build. We're going to replace the current fleet of 14 with a fleet of 12, and it will be a significant investment. It's a bill that comes around once every 40 years, and it has fallen upon our generation. The 40 years is up, and it's time to build that, and we will. Okay, next slide. So I'd like to talk now about, now that we're past the platforms, talk about how we make each one more valuable. And so this is the grow longer arms piece, and there's an underwater component to that and an above water component. The underwater component is to increase the effective range of our torpedoes from the 10 or so miles that we have today and get that out past 100 miles. 100-mile torpedo. I challenged some folks to come up with a propulsion method to do that, and we found it. And then someone else came to us with a propulsion method that will get us to about 200 miles, which is good. So what happens when you have a 100 or 200-mile torpedo? Well, you start thinking about it. Your whole picture of the world changes when you do that. You stop thinking in terms of what is the bearing and range from my ship to the target, and you start thinking a lot more, start thinking in terms of geographic coordinates. And the bosses that we work for start thinking of torpedoes as underwater tomahawks, because they can go to the appointed place in time, appointed place at the appointed time. They can be potentially redirected. And although it's our job to get them to the fight, we might easily hand over the terminal homing of one of our torpedoes to somebody else who happens to have better information at the time that that torpedo is going to do the last leg of its journey. It's pretty exciting stuff. It creates all types of new opportunities for us to integrate this torpedo weapon system with other forces, especially our brothers in the strike groups, but maybe even beyond that. Very, very exciting stuff. But in between those two things, there's another thing that we call, first of all, we call what we do today, we're calling it the lead bullet. Yeah, it's about 10 miles. And then we're calling this next step up is about, we call it the silver bullet. And that is shooting things over the horizon from your submarine without any outside assistance using an unmanned air vehicle, a very inexpensive unmanned air vehicle that you launch from your own ship that looks over the horizon and it tells you what's going on, lets you meet all those rules of engagement so that you know you're engaging the one you want to and no one else. And again, another very promising technology that has been demonstrated already. And then we call this very long-range weapon the golden bullet, which, given that it's geographically driven, isn't restricted to open water. It can go in the harbor. It can go up the river. It can knock on the door of the tunnel that has whatever the tunnel might have. So there's a lot of things we can do with that. And with that, we'll go to the, I'm sorry, let's go above the waterline. Most of the ordnance that we've used in the last 20, 30 years has been the Tomahawk land attack missile. And many folks, including my buddy Jim Colgery in the back there, remembers when we carried the Tomahawk anti-ship missile. And we always knew that that missile, if we shot it, we knew it would hit something. We just didn't know what it would hit. And that was because we had a missile whose kinetic range was greater than the range at which we could effectively command and control. But our ability to command and control has improved dramatically since then. What we haven't done is acquired the weapon to allow us to utilize that. So we're looking in terms of a multi-mission weapon that can be used against a land target or a target at sea. And that's very important to the submarine force because, you know, we can't decide before we leave San Diego what fight we're going to fight. And we have to be able to adapt from one fight to the other. And there's work going on right now to take some of the technology exists to add for a small cost a anti-surface ship capability to our land attack missiles. So what's so important about that? You know, the bomb's not all that big compared to a torpedo. But here's what it does. It forces an adversary who thinks that he might have a submarine somewhere within 1,000 miles of him. He has to adopt an air defense posture. And therefore, he has to carry defensive weapons. And every slot he fills with a defensive weapon, he will not be filling with an offensive weapon. Furthermore, he has to maintain air defense radars up, and that helps all of us in a variety of ways to track where he is. And if he wants to do that at a sophisticated level between ships, he has to maintain data links up to keep all his ships on the same page. And that provides all kinds of other opportunities for us to do things that are very difficult to defend against. So it's not just the kinetic piece, it's the ambiguity of where is the submarine versus what could he do to me. This is how we take these things together to really increase our deterrent value and also our kinetic capabilities in time of war. Next slide, please. Okay, we call this piece Beat the Adversary System. And, you know, if we had anticipated anti-access area denial with some years of foresight, we probably would have done a few things differently. So as we stand here today, and as we look at anti-access area denial potentially going undersea, we have a brief window of time in which we can prepare for that. And we're using that window of time. And the goal is very simple. It is as the adversaries invest in their ability to find submarines through acoustic means, optical means, radar means, and so forth, we will provide him with many, many things that look very, very good on their equipment. And we will put them, after the investment is done, right back in the same position where they are today. Was, I think I might have something, I can't really tell, which always leads to the same thing we do right now. So I can't really tell, I think I'll drop a bomb on it. Because that's what people do. It looks good, feels good, I have a target, it meets my criteria, I'm going to bomb it, which is exactly what we want them to do. And we want them to do that over and over and over again, only to find out that all that ordnance hasn't changed their strategic position one iota, which will lead them to realize that many of the things that they're attacking must not be real. And that is, we think, a key to how we get people who decide to go kinetic, how to come back off, because they'll realize that it's a losing proposition. Because the whole time they're doing all that, we'll be inflicting significant damage on their forces. Okay, that requires us to have, again, acoustic, radar, and cyber countermeasures. And I'll leave it at that in this group. Okay, next slide. This is all about protecting things. It's very, very hard to have perfect knowledge over a huge area of ocean. It is entirely feasible at reasonable cost to have near perfect knowledge over a select piece of ocean. So that requires some coordination between ASW forces and keeping areas clear so that our strike groups know where they can and where they cannot have freedom of maneuver. And then the strike group commander can match where he has freedom of maneuver with where he needs to be to do his mission. And we will keep those forces very much in the game. And again, as I said before, there are other things that are also very important, that we know what is going on around them, and we're going to maintain the ability or grow the ability to do that in many, many cases using unmanned systems. Okay, and the next page, I've talked to that somewhat already, but that is pulling together everything from the most exquisite national technical means down to unclassified information, sharing it amongst all of our key decision makers, allowing us to rapidly converge on decisions in a short period of time, looking at the same picture so we can facilitate that conversation. And next slide. So I want to dwell on this one a little bit. This is, I think, this is the Washington, D.C. battlefield. So if you look in the outer ring there, you can see that's our platform programs. And, you know, we're in the nuclear submarine business, and platforms of that complexity necessarily take many years, really over a decade, to design and build because of the level and types of technology, and because of the types of exquisite safeguards that we need to ensure that are a part of that process at every step of the way. And we're pretty good at that, actually. And we want to sort of keep that going about the same. But it also requires a a constant level of effort. For example, to sustain our strategic deterrent, we have to stay on the path that we're on right now, and we can't afford any bumps in the road due to things like sequestration or other, budget battles here. We need to have a predictable future for our industry partners so they can acquire the materials and the workforce for the long-term commitment that is shipbuilding. That's how it has to happen. We can help them through things like block purchases of submarines, so they and their suppliers can work their future. But we can't do 10-year programs with 1-year uncertainty in funding. In the next circle, the yellow circle, is where we start talking about vehicles. And in many cases, the vehicles have to work to a single-digit years timeline. We have to make them change to impose new quandaries for our adversaries. We have to make them change sometimes to adapt to the quandaries that our adversaries present us. And we can physically do this. I mentioned before we have some issues with JCID's milestones, so we have to define our programs right. We have issues in the testing arena. We did a software change not too long ago to make sure we could accommodate a new threat that was presented to us, and we got that change done in about 5 months, along with some significant in-house testing. But the external testing regime that we go through wanted us to do 165 in-water shots to prove that this little software change we made in one segment of the program was good to go. 165 shots, that's almost a year's worth of training shots for the submarine force. We can't do business that way. We have to leverage modeling and simulation. We have to have people who are knowledgeable in software to recognize that this module does not affect all those other modules, and we need to keep that pace of change going. We also have to learn how to define our programs. I learned a lot by studying naval aviation and this little change they made to the Hornet to turn it into the Super Hornet, which of course is in effect an entirely different and vastly superior aircraft in every respect. So we're following that lead. I make no apologies for it as we do our heavyweight torpedo restart, is what we're calling it, so we can sustain our weapons inventory. And that restart is going to open our production line, but that production line will be tied to an innovation effort that will parallel what we do with the combat systems on the submarines, where every other year we come up with what we call a technical insertion. And in the years between that, we do a software change so that we can continuously evolve, but keep the program name the same. Similarly, if we're doing things like unmanned air vehicles, which is really, you could say, it's really an imaging system to support the way the submarine operates, well, our combat system has an imaging subsystem. So the worst thing we could do to move quickly would be to define the unmanned air vehicle as a new program. Rather, we should define it as an extension of the combat system. It's a technical insertion, so to speak. And I'm not doing this to be devious. If I was, I wouldn't be telling you all. I'm simply looking at what is the capability I need to deliver, and what are the hurdles that I have to face, and how can I overcome those hurdles? And that's why we come up with some things that just might not make sense if you didn't deal with that whole picture. Is this making sense here? Okay, and then on to the right, the timelines get shorter and shorter because sometimes we need to do a software change very quickly. You get a new radar, we get a new countermeasure, and that sort of thing. And as we continuously learn working with the SEALs, we're doing some pretty good work with them recently, with them helping us with our unmanned vehicles, because we're working on in the long term on these fancy things that put the vehicle in the water and get it back. But until that day comes, we have Navy SEALs, the most adaptable ocean interface in the world. They chuck them out of the dry deck shelter, And then when they come back, we put a buoy up and they catch them and we bring them back in. And, but in the process of that interaction we have, they said, well, if we can put this thing out, they have a bunch of other stuff they'd like to put out through that same dry deck shelter. So as we compare notes with each other, we learn a lot from each other. Okay, next slide. I'd like to talk briefly, in case you think that this strategy is, PowerPoint deep, as we say, about just a few things that we've done recently to show how quickly we can innovate if people let us. And so we have this thing called the Fleet Modular Autonomous Undersea Vehicle, which we're doing with missions with as we speak. And we didn't create this program out of whole cloth. We looked around at what the academic world and the ocean and gas, or the oil and gas industry were doing, and we took some vehicles that worked just fine and we adapted them for our purposes. And they're very good, very reliable. They have thousands and thousands of mission hours on them before we even started using them. And then we looked at the unique things that we need. Well, one of the things we need is the ability to do high-speed data transfer through the water. So we've got some folks to do some work and had some good success recently with high-speed underwater laser modems. So what does that mean to me? Well, it means if I launch a unmanned vehicle from a submarine that cannot recover it, I can get the information that it determined on its mission. Even if I don't get the vehicle back, I get the most important thing, which is the information. In the right-hand side there, you can see you see a torpedo. You can see that it's modular, and in the lower right, you can see one of our developmental engines that gives us more than 100 miles of range. In the center, you see a dispenser where one vehicle can drop many, many payloads. The payload in the picture is an acoustic training device that we can program for we'll just say the type of sound that we want, and we can put that where we need it. It can look like us, it can look like somebody else. It's good stuff. In the lower left, not all the way to the left, but there's a couple of pictures there that show the thing floating in the water. I want to tell just a short story about that. For my entire life, I have wanted to have a periscope decoy, just so I could mess with people, I think. And I had this idea that there would be this thing that we would launch out, and it'd be a vehicle, and the mast would come up and go down. And I went up to Newport, Rhode Island, to the Undersea Warfare Center up there, and I asked them if they could build something like that. And as kind of words as they could find, they said, we could, but that would be really stupid. Not their exact words, but I caught their drift. And it was stupid, they said, because in a much more elegant fashion, we don't need to have a periscope. We need to have something that looks like a periscope to people who are looking for periscopes. And so what it really came down to is can you give the right radar return at the right times? It might make someone think, hey, there's something there. I don't see anything. It must be a submarine. It's gone. It's back again. That's the types of decisions that people go through when they decide that there's a submarine out there. And maybe even they need to make it look like it's moving a little bit. Not too fast, just a little bit. And then the real brilliance began when the guy from Newark who got the project, before he did one piece of work, is he called his buddy in Ohio at the Air Force Research Lab, and he said, you got something like this? And he says, I do, but it looks like it's going 600 knots. But not to worry, that's digits. We can change that. And next thing you know, the card gets dropped in FedEx, and a couple of short time later, we have something working on a boat in Rhode Island, and about a month after that, we have that thing in the buoy that you see floating off of San Clemente Island. And I won't say whose radar display that is, but it's not ours, and it looks pretty good. And so anyway, but this is the type of thing we need the creativity to do and implement quickly. And those types of decoys, they cost a little less than $3,000. So if I can make people drop $1 million torpedoes on $3,000 things that look like submarines, we're on the right side of this asymmetric business. And when you leverage that with the ambiguity of do I have a submarine or not, and the capability that you must worry about if there are submarines in a certain place, this is how we start getting to this deterrence, conventional deterrence theory, where we can make an adversary realize that the cost of going to war at sea with us is going to be severe. Is this making sense to you? Okay, and then next is really just to drill down on this fleet modular AUV, which starts with something the oceanographers used, is a program already. So we add a few things to their program, like the laser comms to download the information, better batteries. You know, we had a bad experience a few years ago with lithium-ion batteries on a submarine, but we've got projects to make sure that the technology gets better. Industry is helping us. You know, Elon Musk wants to put a huge lithium-ion battery in everybody's garage. So now we're going to have this huge test bed. You know, if houses don't start blowing up all over the country in the next 2 years, we're going to know that we have mastered some lithium-ion battery technology. So, you know, and we need to have an open enough mind to say that if that is good enough to put in your house, it's probably good enough to go in an unmanned vehicle. Okay, next slide. So that's it at a very high level. We think we have a strategy that is coherent, that is effective, that meshes with the larger needs of the national strategy. And with that, I think Dr. Hicks and I are going to sit and take any of your questions. Thank you.
Please.
You have a preference there?
Yeah. Well, first, I would be remiss if I
Bye bye.